Welcome back to Super Sentai Review, episode number 220. Pretty good number to end this particular Sentai at. It's basically just, here we're discussing the last 5 episodes for Gekiranger, plus the Go-onger versus Gekiranger movie. Excuse me. So, in these 5 episodes, well, in the first, we start off basically in episode 45. We have the final appearance of Seku, who was actually Jan's father, who had to be killed via mercy killing about 5 minutes in the episode. And then pretty much this episode and the following one are just kind of still building up the end. Basically, it's part of the end game arc for this particular series, where we have the fated clash, the final big battle between Ryo and Jan, which ends with Jan winning. And then, of course, well, here's the thing. Mel reveals to Ryo, who actually survived his battle at the end, briefly in giant size, that apparently Long has been using him all along as a tool. And then Long confessing, yeah, I've been behind everything since the start of this. Like, he was behind basically the death. He basically killed Ryo's family. He also was responsible for killing Jan's parents. Yep. And he also sent to motion basically the rival school. That was all him. He's behind everything related to the series. Except for the revival of Mel. Except he did kind of reveal a lot of stuff related to her. He did manipulate her a lot of stuff. I highly doubt that basically the whole thing with her when she fell in love with Ryo. I highly doubt that was part of the plan. It just that basically, I'm sure he probably used that for his. He probably found that useful to him, that Mel was in love with Ryo. And well, he takes Mel hostage, and this is something though and we see something that in this one we don't really see. This is something we very rarely ever see in the Heisei era for the Super Sentai. We have the Rangers storming the villain's base of operations toward the end of the series. And we even have something that I always really enjoy seeing in the show era. The Rangers storming into the strategy room of the villains. Yes, this doesn't happen very often. As a matter of fact, in case you're curious though, I believe in the following Sentai this did happen too. Go-onger. It did not happen in Shurikenger. It did happen in Go-sager. Yes, it did happen there. You might be thinking though, did it happen in Go-kaiger too? Yes, it did. Though in the case of Go-sager, it was mostly the final villain base because there was about 3 of them. And I like the last villain base, basically was underwater. And they did storm that one, so this was basically the first time in the world that did that. Now, in the case of stuff between Gekiranger and this one, the 5 from Hurricaneger, we have Hurricaneger, Abaranger, Dekiranger, Majiranger, and Bakaranger. Excuse me, those 5, if in fact in the finale, where they storm villain's base, I don't know because I haven't seen those yet. I've only seen the Power Ranger equivalent of those. Yep, so they break in. And of course, well, we have Ran and Ritsu with a take on, well, Long. And of course, then we have, of course, Jan going to Ryo, basically convincing him to basically they should team up, take down Long. And of course, and free Mel. Of course, they have to get there. And of course, you have Ryo freeing Mel, Jan freeing Ritsu and Ran. And they try to leave, and of course, basically, they kind of formalize their team. And supposedly they beat Long in this episode. And of course, well, Seku is supposedly defeated. And then really in the episode, nope, he didn't die. So of course, Jan basically decided to dub Ryu and Mel Geki Black and Geki Green respectively. 2 killers they don't have. Yep. And here's the thing. Those 2 names are never mentioned ever again after, like, the final episodes. Ryu was never referred to as Geki Black. Nope. Never is. He's only referred once by Jan in episode 47, and never again. And then 48 basically is sadly we see something completely unexpected. We see Ryu and Mel both die in episode 48. First, Mel first. Well, actually, first before that, they try to join up with, of course, the Gekirangers. Though, of course, Ritsu and Ran cannot forgive them for their actions, so they go through the Ken Fist, which is a judgment. So they want to atone for their sins. So Long is not in their old base of operations, so they actually go back to an abandoned base, which this is quite interesting to say the least. Now you might be curious though, was a scene similar to this in Jungle Fury? Yes, there was. As a matter of fact, they actually did kind of this scene at their old school, the Big Con school, the Order of the Claw, as it was in Jungle Fury, where they have the scene where you have Camille and Jared, where they basically talk and discuss what to do next, and of course, in friendly terms. It's a very similar scene, except they swap the locations, but it's a very impactful scene. And what does Rio do? He burns down his base, which apparently he had revived this particular order after it apparently been defunct after the previous remasters were sealed by the main masters of the main series. So then of course, goes Fist Judgment. Of course, they're about middle to it, and then Long shows up to spoil the party, and then of course Mel sacrifices herself in order to, well, in order to prove her worthiness, basically atone. Of course, they both wanted to lose Judgment anyways, and of course Rio sacrificed himself, supposedly killing Long. And then at the end of the by the way, we do see Long in his true form in this 8-headed dragon. And when I saw this, I'm like, that is similar to King Ghidorah. I mean, the whole golden aspect, the fact it's multiple heads. It reminds me of King Ghidorah. Well, the version they had from GMK. The movie Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, All Monsters Attack. It's a very similar type of thing, and that's reminding me of that. I'm sure that Toei probably took inspiration from the movie, from the Godzilla movies for this character. So, and this also is the first time that the cat, Safu, has actually seen Long. Yeah, and by the way, Dory Yin, he actually briefly makes appearance in episode 46, and he appears in 49 as well. And, well, his appearance there was mostly just to ignite, well, Jan's memories and figure out that the law was responsible for destruction of his village and also killing his mother. So, then of course Ryu, before he proceeds to try to sacrifice himself in order to be up to supposedly end Long. Before he does, he releases his own resuit inside of the original 3 Gekirangers. And then he sacrifices, and supposedly everything is over, and then Long comes back, revealing he just sacrificed himself, well, mostly for nothing. But it was a very good sacrifice, and then he's like, oh, screw you, I have plenty of time basically to kill you guys. I'm going to basically wreck the city. And he does. So they're about to go confront him, but Geki, Chopper, and Geki Violet basically deal with him, while the main 3 have to deal with the 3 fiends. Of course, Ritsu inherits the abilities of Riku. Maku goes to Jan, and of course, Kinita goes to Ran. And this is their last appearance this is the last appearance ever. Well, they're in human form. Very briefly, you see them. And so the only way to get rid of Long is surprisingly not to kill him, but to seal him. Yes, seal him in a ball. Yep. And then they pick it up. Of course, they play with it for a while. So they figure what to do next. Jan just volunteers to be its guard. So, and also, he, Ran, and Ritsu become masters. Yep, they get their own students. And what happens to the Gekirangers after this? Well, Jan goes on a journey. Ritsu and Ran stay to teach students, which is different than Jungle Fury, where their counterparts, where Ritu's counterpart asks Ran's counterpart on a date, because, well, these two, I think, for each other the whole series. And, of course, the Yellow Ranger's like, Jungle Fury's like, well, it's about time you do it. What about the other 3? Jan and Gao go on a journey. And in the case of Ken, he stays behind and works at the plant where of course, the elephant works at as the plant manager. And of course, also, we see one last time, we see Ken's sister. Yep, so then you have Jan going to Hong Kong, of all places. Yes, Hong Kong. Which, this would have been a good idea to bring back the detective from the movie. But they didn't for some reason. I don't know why. This would have been great to connect the movie. I mean, the only thing to connect the movie to the series is the Megazord formation. Which, by the way, they actually use another time in this final arc. They actually have, where they have Ryu and Kale would use their Zords. And they combined with the Gekiranger Zords to form a Megazord. We wanted to consider a different slight information here. Unlike last time when they were basically against it, here they basically do it because they feel like it. Because they want to. Yep. And sadly, this will be like, and of course they all go off. Now here's the thing. With the exception of the cat, now after this particular thing wraps up, all those other 6 masters who appeared in this series, this was their last appearance. Because though Don Yen does briefly get mentioned in the next movie, in the movie I'll talk about next. But yeah, the rest of the masters, this was their last appearance. Bye-bye to them. Meanwhile, though, we have the movie where apparently Jane is back in Tokyo. Somehow, they didn't really explain it. I do appreciate, though, they do follow the Gekiranger continuity pretty well. But apparently, this movie has trouble with the continuity of Go-onger. Because at the time this movie came out, the leader of the police masters was already dead by the time this movie came out. So you could say this said before then, but they never really, they could say it did. There's also a bunch of continuity stuff with the engines show up there too, that show up at the very end of the movie. So, movie starts out basically after, of course, they tend to poke fun at stuff, where we start up with Jan being attacked by one of the villains in the movie. And by the way, this movie was never adapted to Power Rangers. Nope, never was. Do not know the reason for it. So we have Mika, who is main antagonist in this movie, along with Nakachin Binky, who appears in this movie plus 2 other movies, and that's it for him. Yeah. Yep, so the whole thing in this movie is get their hands in the ball. Of course, we have Jan, Ritsu, and Rand get sucked into the dimension. Well, the Go-ongers show up. Yes, they show up. At least, here's the thing, though. This is also the first verse movie I've seen where we don't see, like, with the exception of the setting up the thing, the main story itself. This is actually the first where we don't see the main team. We don't see Go-onger show up until almost 10 minutes in, which is surprising. I was kind of surprised to see that, because I would have thought, though, they would have shown the main team first, then the Gekiranger show up again. But no, they actually showed the Gekirangers first. Okay, so, by the way, Bell he's still around. That's why Mel was gone. He wanted the world. Somehow he was still kept alive, despite the fact that, well, Mel's dead. This is something that's never really explained. So, if you're occasionally curious, though, what happened to Masters? I don't know. Also, one thing about this movie that's not really explained, what the heck happened to the Kishi forms? You know, where they had the original thing go white? Yeah, apparently people who wrote this movie completely forgot they can do that. Because they had the bazooka, they had to show the movie, but they couldn't go to that form for some reason. Like, did they run out of juice for that? Or are they just basically going to feel like it's their masters? That's one thing about this movie that's never really explained. What happened to those forms? Because they actually were masters of those at the end of the series. Though you could say, oh, maybe the people who told me were dead. They really don't explain what happened to those masters. They just don't show up here. Like, were they absent because the actors were unavailable? That's one of the things with this movie never really explained. Is that what happened to those other 6 masters? They're not dead. As far as by the end of the previous series, they're all still alive. Only the cat shows up here. Who, surprisingly, not all surprised because he's basically, well, he's a master. So, then of course they go to, well, the Go-ongers basically go straight to the main headquarters of the Gekiranger, which is great to see this place again. Which, by the way, after this movie, that building, apparently from what I've read online, this building does show up again in another Sentai series. Which one, you might ask? Why, it's, excuse me. It is in Gekiranger in the year 2020. No, seriously. Yeah. That's next, along with, of course, Miki and Natsume. That's where the next time they appear. Well, because they have a connection to one of the Rangers, not one. I'll get to that when I talk about that particular Sentai. So their plan is to supposedly remove the seal for Long's seal and free him. So they take Long's ball, they call it that shooting, along with the engine souls. By the way, the engine police ministers, they don't really play a role in this movie at all. I would have thought, though, they would play a role, but they don't. They're basically relegated to minor villains. They show up for a few scenes. They don't really affect the plot at all. The grunts show up, which is a great fight sequence we have in the movie, where they take on the grunts. Now, surprisingly, they don't bring back the grunts from the previous series. Sometimes they do this for crossovers. This is the first one I've seen where they don't do that. Actually, one of the very few they don't. So they later break into the dimension, and then, of course, who's protecting the Earth while the other two are basically wrecking the Earth? Why, it's basically the Go-on wings. Yep. Because, of course, well, they got out, and, of course, they go through some training, and they eventually unlock their own engine kin forms, which they don't really use after this. I don't remember them actually using the main series. I remember, because, well, it's probably a good move to use. So they go through that training. And the training involves catching lead, which is something they did. That's something that Rand did do the main series, which is something that I'm glad they brought that up. But as for the two brothers, okay, playing the piano with your toes. That apparently is the training. Okay, that makes no freaking sense at all. But this one did make sense. Jen having Sosuke, where you have to clean the building with this one cloth. Okay, that is a good Easter egg for the previous series, but they don't make no freaking sense at all. Of course, they eventually don't master stuff, and of course, meanwhile, the villains, they smash the ball into a size of an. They choose the ball all in the actual machine. Like, oh, why does this work? Oh, because they had to be this size. Okay, so he proceeds to just churn the ball. He just basically just grind it into basically the size of a soul card. And puts it in, and somehow this kind of partially revives Long, which is interesting. And like, Long. And by the way, it's the same actor, which I do appreciate the fact they actually did this. They brought back the same actor. He's like, oh, I remember you. And I'm going to basically thank you for sealing me in that ball. Yep. And of course, it kind of merged with the robot and go giant size. Standard stuff here. They also mention about the reason why they're in town. Natsume's birthday. Yep. Now, how in the heck these people got back, I don't know. Yeah, so eventually, after the villains defeated, and of course, Jen got. By the way, during the movie, the Go-on rings briefly revived Ryu and Mel. Yes, though their souls wander eternity and they can't reincarnate, despite the fact that Rio did have a reincarnation. Yeah, this makes no freaking sense at all. So they defeat the villains in a really awesome battle. And once again, we see the Zords again for Ryu and Kale with Mel, which is great to see those again. And of course, B shows up in slightly different attire than usually. He's wearing a hat this time. And of course, a good movie. And of course, they have the birthday sequence. Oh, by the way, also the movie, Ken, who is basically the leads man, he hits on Saki. Yep, he does. Yeah, and he hits on her several times. Yep. But yeah, and of course, then we have the engine wrap again. And we briefly have a cameo here by Shuriken Red. Yep, he makes a brief cameo in this movie. As debut for basically the very next Sentai that came out, which was Shurikenger. We also had the preview for Kamen Decade, which I don't know if they might remember them doing this with the Air Sentai crossover, with their crossovers they did. But I love the movie. The movie was really good. Yep. Not much else to say about the main series itself. Final thoughts about Gekiranger. Great series. Great music. Though the movie, the crossover they had after the series, there's a bunch of questions I asked for the movie, but I've already basically asked them. But damn good series. Now you might be curious though about this. Did you know that most of the cast of this movie would never return to Sentai ever again out of the transform form? Yeah, the actors who played Ryu, Ken, Gao, Ritsu. So it's Ritsu, Ran, Go, Ryo, and Ken. These 5 actors would never appear in Sentai ever again. Their transform forms were, but not them. This is the last time they appear in Sentai. Though Miki and, of course, I mentioned I have those 2. The cat also is up there as well. Jen, of course, we'll talk about the very next episode. The Gekiranger tribute and Go-onger. I'll talk about the very next episode. Now, as for the very next Sentai I'm going to be discussing, with the conclusion of this one, it's going to be, drumroll please, Turbo Ranger. Yes, Turbo Ranger. The last Sentai of the 1980s. I'll be discussing that next. And as for what Sentai I'll be discussing after that one, I'll really want to finish that one. But first, before I get to that one, I'm actually going to do Kamen Rider Super 1. And that'll be the next Tokusatsu thing we talk about. But the next few videos, next one's going to be a review for My Hero Academia light novel. And of course, basically a comic corner. Okay? Next video. Bye.